What's up out there? Path of Exile is a game of knowledge and experience. So the more you understand about things like how the crafting system works, how gearing works, how a build is put together, things like that, those are the knowledge side of the coin in Path of Exile. On the other hand, you've got the experience side, and that is what I want to talk about today. These are 5 things that I have learned the hard way, and these are basically the experience of it, not necessarily a crafting or skill related side of it. So let's dive in. The first thing I want to discuss is learning to leave fights you cannot win. When I first started playing this game, and before I ever put a video out on this, I played it by myself, just sitting here. I didn't talk to anybody else. I didn't read anything on Reddit. And as I played through the campaign, I found out that when you died at the boss, you could spawn right outside the boss door with the boss at the status that you left when it died. So if it was at 3/4 health, you could go back in and just take the rest of the health off, or die a few times and keep chipping away at its health. That is not really a good way to approach things. I also learned that even in the mapping section, when you're in a Vol side area, when you die in the Vol side area, you get booted out to the portal outside the Vol side area. You don't lose a portal off your map device. So basically what I was doing was dying inside the Vol area, coming back and just keep plowing through. Experience has taught me that there's no real practical reason to keep farming, or farming's probably not the right word, to keep pushing on something like that. There's no reason to keep pushing a Vol side area. There's no reason to keep hammering on the boss. You certainly can. There is an XP penalty you take on death, which is greatly exaggerated once you get past the campaign. It's not bad. Act 1 through 5, there is no death penalty, death cost at all. And then once you get into the second set of acts, you do get some form of death penalty, and then it gets worse afterwards. But you also gain a lot of XP very quickly, so you don't really notice it that much until you get deeper into the mapping section, especially once you're level 70 or above, somewhere in that realm, you really start noticing it. But I never knew that, for the longest time, I did not know that there was a death cost. And even beyond that, I was wasting a lot of time trying to push into a Vol side area or push a boss or something that I probably should have just stopped working on and went and leveled up, changed my gear, something like that, because it was wasting time. I could have spent, my time would have been better spent working on gear, leveling up, getting XP and things like that. So pretty much the first concept that I want to put out here is if you can't win the fight, you have to recognize that and leave. Same thing goes with we're not talking about just a campaign or just a Vol side area. The same thing applies to fighting rare monsters, fighting the boss in a map, fighting the map in general. Like maybe you go into a map and you missed something on there that says you can't hex a monster. Monsters are hex proof, and now you can't do enough damage to kill them, or it takes a really long time to down them. Maybe you overjuice a monster in the wildwood, and now you've got a rare that you just can't kill. Or it's very, very slow. You need to learn to move on from that stuff instead of trying to be stubborn about it. I am a very stubborn person in that regard. I will try to push it down as much as possible. And it's been very difficult for me to just leave that fight and go on and do something else. I've gotten to the point where if I go into a map and the map is fairly difficult, I'll back out and go pick a different map. Because sometimes I don't catch a modifier on there that it really affects me, or I die real easily and I'm trying to level. So I don't want to keep pushing that map and dying over and over and lose all the XP that I've built up. So lesson number 1, or I don't want to necessarily call it a lesson, but the first thing that I've had to really learn and come to terms with, and this is in a few hundred hours of experience, like it's taken me a lot of time to figure this one out, and that is to learn to leave the fights that you can't win or are going to take so long that it's just not worth doing. You can move on and get XP somewhere else. You can spend your time more wisely. So learn to leave fights. Piggybacking off of learning to leave the fights that you can't win is that leveling past, say, level 88, 89, 90, somewhere in that realm becomes a chore, and it becomes difficult, and it becomes something that you need to focus on. If you're trying to collect currency or do bossing or push the red maps harder and further into the red maps, it's not a good idea to try to work on leveling at the same time. You're either pushing content that's difficult or you're leveling. There is a very serious XP cost when you die, for one, and that cost gets negated horribly. You could spend 2 hours to move a quarter of the way across your XP bar, and then you die one time and you've lost 2 hours worth of progress. So that struggle becomes real, and you have to really start making decisions on whether you want to push content or level your character. So you can do multiple things at once up to a certain point, and then you really need to focus in on your XP and XP alone and not worry about all the other content or all the difficult stuff. Once you've leveled up and you have 0 XP, yeah, go push some other content or whatever. But it is kind of a dedicated focus that you need. I feel like you really need to dedicate your focus to level up anything beyond 90, especially level 90 and above. It gets more and more difficult, and every death you get loses more and more XP and makes it that much harder. The next thing that I learned the hard way is that you have to read everything like a lawyer, and you have to really pay attention to every description on skill gems, gear, in your POB, on your skill tree. You have to really focus in on everything. You need to really double check your POB against what passives you've got. Make sure the mastery didn't change, because sometimes you can't tell that the mastery changed. So you need to really double check everything constantly. And as you apply a point to the passive tree, you need to read what you're applying. Now, this one increases attack speed. Okay, no big deal. But some of these, like this one here, says I have no life regeneration. So if I start getting regenerate life on any of my gear, I don't need that. So if I pay attention to this, that modifier can be removed from the item and replaced with something different. So as I roll gear, if I come across some that have life regen, and I could re-roll, maybe I want to stay there because the gear is good otherwise, but if I can get by with removing that and not making that a requirement, then you have to pay attention to this. Same thing with like this node over here. This is another good example. 40% more attack damage if accuracy is higher than max life. So if my accuracy sucks and isn't higher than my life, I'm losing 40% damage, and I don't ever deal critical strikes. So you've now lost if you don't have your accuracy higher, you've lost critical strikes and you've lost 40% damage. So you have to really pay attention to this. And this is my Bone Shatter build right now, but this goes for Righteous Fire. All the builds that I've ever followed, you have to really pay attention to the POB, follow all the build guides advice that you can. There's a notes section typically. A lot of people put notes in there. Like, you have to really fine-tooth comb, go through everything and read it and understand it. You have to go through the gearing section and look at the gear. Now, you're not going to get the exact same gear that person has, because this is all RNG based, but you don't want to be picking the wrong gear and have the wrong things. And you really have to dissect every aspect of all of it. And it gets very difficult to follow some of these and keep all of that in your head. So you really need to pick one build, especially if you're a newer player. It doesn't hurt to go try other builds out and see what the other side looks like, but you really want to focus in on one build and get really good with that build so that you understand every little detail and aspect of it, because you're gonna die more often. You're not going to scale up the damage you need. You're going to run into a lot of problems not following the guide. Now, RNG is RNG and you can't control that, but you can control highlighting over in POB and making sure that they didn't change this plus 50 max life to something different, or they didn't change this one to something different. Like, you have to do those little things. And if they have a section for like in-game versus the axe or something like that, you have to change those sections and make sure you're keeping up with it. And you have to make sure and change that in the passive section, in the skill section, and in the gear section. So you really have to keep up with all of it all the time and completely understand as much as you can how the build works, the gear you need, the skills you're using. They may change skill gems at some point. They may change support gems. You have to follow all of it and keep up with it as you level up and as you go through the game, because the game will change. You will run into issues. You will run into brick walls. Like once you hit red maps, those can be very difficult. You may have to change your gear. You may have to change a whole section of the passive tree out. You've got to follow that. That is a very difficult thing to learn, and it takes many, many hours to really get good at and honed in on that aspect. These next two items are kind of similar in some regards, and I want to lay out a little bit of backstory before I go into these two. So if you've played other ARPGs like Diablo 1, Diablo 2, Diablo 3, Grim Dawn, maybe Wolcen, I don't remember all of them exactly that I've played over the years, Titan Quest in there, and each of them are a little bit different, but typically the gear that you find on the ground is what you're going to equip. You typically don't have crafting, or you don't have as robust of a crafting system as Path of Exile. Those games are far different than Path of Exile. Path of Exile gives you basically a blank slate that you can actually remove quantity or affixes from an item, scour it off, start from scratch, and build up a new item. That is not typically how an ARPG goes. I don't want to make a blanket statement because some of the games I haven't played in many years, but this does not feel like the same systems that those games had. Like, for instance, if I found a unique item in another game that said it grants this skill with maybe plus 20 strength, a lot of older games, those unique items were set. They were always the same item. When you found them, they were fixed. So you never found a different variation. You found that item and that item alone, and that was it. So you could make a build around that particular item, or you could enhance your build with that particular item. You knew what you were getting every time. Some games over the years, I think, added some variability to it. Like maybe you get 18 to 20 strength or something like that. So maybe you get a slightly better one or a slightly worse one. But I don't remember a lot of games having bad rolls on them, bad modifiers on them, or having different modifiers to where they're just completely different every time you get one. Path of Exile is far different in that regard. So the first thing that I want to say is that uniques are not unique. Every unique can be different. Now they have a base, for example, this replica Dragonfang's Flight. This particular amulet can have, I think it can have a range on the all attributes and the elemental resistances and stuff like that. Like those numbers might differ slightly. Okay, fine. I did find, and this is where this came from, directly from this league that we're in now, because I ran into this. I found one of these amulets with that exact name, and everything was almost the same, except this one offers +3 to level of all Righteous Fire gems. I kept that because I thought I would try to do a Righteous Fire build this league. The other one that I found, the original one that I had found, had a different skill listed in there, plus whatever level to whatever that skill gem was. So this amulet, maybe it's got some the same attributes or similar attributes, but it can have a completely different skill associated with it. So you may find ones for different versions. Is it worth keeping those other versions? Potentially. You might want to keep different ones for, different builds you're going to do. You might keep one like I did for this particular build. But the important thing that I'm trying to explain here is that you may find an item that is different than other items. And in other ARPGs that I've played, I'm not used to this. I'm used to items being more of a framework. This is more of a framework. It's bad terminology. It's not the way to explain it. I'm used to them being more set. They're more set in what they're supposed to be. This game is more of a framework where you may find any number of different things. So you have to be careful of it. The other problem that I ran into in this league is I tried to do some magic find, and I got one of those Venters. I don't have one anymore. The Venter's ring that gives you some magic find. I did not catch on it. I saw it, but it didn't sink in exactly what it meant. I feel dumb for it now because looking back, I'm like, well, that was stupid. I should have known better. But it had a plus level in the implicit side for item find. You're going to find more stuff. Increased rarity, I think it was. In the other stuff down below, it said decreased rarity to find stuff. So it was like a plus 10% increased and a minus or a 30% reduced So basically, it was reducing my item find by 20%, my rarity by 20% in there. So I didn't catch that. And this kind of piggybacks off the last comment about how you have to read everything and pay attention to every little aspect of everything in this game. When you're going to put a piece of gear on, you need to understand what you're putting on and why you're putting it on, and not just throw something on. It's okay to throw something on and test it and see how it goes, but you still need to be eagle-eyed on it and read that and verify that it actually fits your build. And just because somebody's POB, like in this case, just because they say go get this replica Dragon Fang, doesn't mean you're going to get the right one. So you may have to pay attention to the actual skill that it's got in there and not just go grab the, replica Dragon Fang. These are very hard lessons for me because, like I said, this game is so different from a lot of the other ARPGs that I've played that it's just not, it's just so different that it's difficult to keep up with it all. And the final concept that I want to discuss is don't collect too much crap. Okay. This takes many forms. You can, like I have all the different stash tabs on here. So I can have gems. We could do flasks. What else we got? Gear. I've got sections for gearing. I've got sections for jewels. Getting to the idea that this game is different than a lot of other games, or keeping up with that theme, we'll start from the bottom up. That's the easiest way. So flasks. If I go and alt over these different flasks, you'll see that this one's level 64. This one's level 77. We go in here. I don't have any super low ones. I was looking for something that's like really low. The thing with, there's a 57. The thing with flask, this is one of the ones I learned the hard way in here. I got to put that in the right spot. That will bug me. So one of the things I learned about flasks is I started off with a Quicksilver flask. You get it very early on in the game. It was like maybe a item level 12. With gear in Path of Exile, your item level determines what affixes can be on that gear. So if I wanted to put like gain 3 charges when you're hit by an enemy, I'm going to need this to be a certain item level or higher to actually get that. You may get gain 1 charge, but you're not going to get gain 2 charges. And I think in the Quicksilver example that I was looking at, I was trying to get it to have gain 1 charge. And I either couldn't get gain 1 charge at all, or I couldn't get anything but gain 1 charge. So I rolled it a bunch of times and I couldn't figure out what it was doing. So I took it over to Craft of Exile. Got to get it all right here. So I took it over to Craft of Exile and I was looking at the bases. That item level did not have the ability to get that gain charge that I needed. I learned that I had to get it fairly high item level. Like this is item level 80. This now gets me gain 3 charges, but I had to make sure that I had high enough. This one's got gain 2, but it's only level 69. So I need to, the one thing that I learned about flasks is that you need to make sure that they're a high enough item level. And this goes for any of your gear. You cannot put certain affixes on the gear if the item level of the gear is not high enough. So for flasks, that's one thing I learned. The other thing I learned is flasks are not unique items. So in other ARPGs, you're more reliant on what you pick up off the floor. In Path of Exile, this is treated as a base. You can actually scour this off and re-roll all of the modifiers on this item. So I can take this thing, this one here. I can actually craft stuff to this. That is not usual for the other ARPGs that I'm typically used to playing. So this is a base item that I can now use. All of these are base items. So rather than, one of the big problems I had early on was collecting flasks. I had flask tab, I will use flask tab. Well, if you're thinking about picking everything up off the floor and that's what you need to use, that idea holds true. But if you can craft everything and you only need a couple of higher level bases, then you don't need that much. The reason I have so many this time, and well, these are not necessarily good examples, but I've been trying to keep all of the ones that have higher quality. So if we go sort by quality, I've been trading these in for glassblower baubles, and actually I've been taking like the health and mana ones and trading those off. So in this regard, for flasks, I've actually toned down the amount that I'm keeping. I'm keeping some of these for bases so that I have, the different styles of them, but then I've been getting rid of all the higher quality ones to get the glass blower bauble here for currency. So that was one lesson I learned on flasks. If we jump up to gear and weapons, the item level still pertains. So this is item level 84. I think these are all higher level. I don't have any of the lower level stuff anymore. But the higher level modifiers, I believe it's 85. Item level 85 is like the cutoff. You don't need anything beyond that. There's item level 100 or whatever, but they don't really do you any better or do anything better. So item level 83, 84, 85, somewhere in that realm. I don't know exactly where the cutoff is, but those are where all the affixes that you're going to get all of the affixes available on that piece of gear. So keeping level 20 gear, item level 20 gear, not leveled to equip, but item level 20 gear, you're just losing out. So all the crap you get from the campaign, you can ditch. And once you get into the mapping section, you definitely want to switch over to gear you're getting from mapping because it brings the item level up and it gets you into all of the affixes that you can actually use. So I used to keep a lot of gear. I would keep gear for builds that I hadn't even done. I would keep cool looking bows or something like that. I just didn't quite understand everything I needed. And I might be saving something because I'd be like, oh, I'll keep that 6-link because I might make a bow build. Well, you don't need to keep gear for builds you don't have. It's cool if you have a build in mind to keep the gear for it. There's nothing wrong with that. But like I said, I'm used to games where you pick up stuff off the floor and that's what you use, not necessarily scour it and craft onto it. So that was a huge difference. Another thing was all the elder, I have some. I used to keep a lot of these, like the shaper gear, the elder gear, stuff like that. Once again, I'm used to picking stuff up off the ground and thinking that it's, I don't want to use the word unique, but different or made for different things. There's a different word for that I'm not coming up with off the top of my head, but I would keep all the different stuff. So I had Conqueror gear and I had all these different bases because I thought I would use them. But I've learned that if the POB does not call for it or you don't have a specific reason for it, there's no use in picking it up. You can pick up some things for trade, like 6 socketed items so that you get, these jeweler's orbs. You can do stuff like that. You can save certain fractured items. Like I might save some of this because maybe I could use this extra armor and evasion or something like that. I don't know. I'm playing SSF, so some of these might potentially be useful. But these might also have a lot lower item level, so I can't get some of the modifiers that I need on them. So be careful on how much stuff you're keeping and why you're keeping it. And that's why I'm going over examples because I've kept some of this stuff for different reasons. And case in point, skill gems. Well, let's go to jewels first. Cluster jewels, stuff like that. Cluster jewels I don't get a whole lot of, so I've just kind of kept all of them. But jewels I overrun. I found out, again, now this one's corrupted, so not a good example, but these things here, you can scour this off and start over and craft your own. You don't have to be reliant on what drops on the floor. So I used to have a whole tab full of these things. Now I'm just keeping some. I could probably clean these out and get rid of some of the lower bases on here, keep some of the higher ones. That's probably something I need to do is just go through and clean out some of this stuff here. But in the last league, I had this whole tab full and I had to constantly clean it out and it was a headache. Same thing with rings and amulets. Just keep the bases. You don't necessarily want to keep the higher level bases. You don't necessarily want to keep all the garbage and stuff. It just becomes too much to clean up. Same thing with gems. When I first started playing, I did not realize that there was a guy in the library that you can actually go talk to that sold all the different gems in the game, or Lily that sells all the different gems. I did not know these people existed. I did not know you could pretty much buy almost every gem in the game. There are some that drop that you have to go find, but I didn't know that. So I was collecting every gem because I thought, well, maybe I need it. Maybe I can use it. What I've gotten to now is keeping all the higher quality ones. I was keeping all the Vol gems I found, and I'm going to probably clean these out. Unless you need the Vol gem for your build, there's no reason to keep it. So you can just leave those on the floor. And I know somebody's going to pop in here and say, well, you need a better item filter. The item filter is not the problem. The problem is that the stuff that does come through the item filter, maybe you look at it and you're like, oh, maybe I can use that. There's a reason people pick things up because they think it looks cool or they think they need it or something like that. And they probably don't. They just don't know what they're looking at the time. Item filters can only help so much. POBs can only help so much. You still have to follow everything and read it all. Kind of getting back to an earlier point, you need to look at read what you're getting, understand what you're getting and stuff like that. So in this league, instead of having to clean out, you get 500 gems. I've been regularly cleaning this out. I've been saving the higher quality gems. For one, you can trade these in for the transfigured gems, and the higher the quality, the better quality you get from the transfigured gem. But number two, you can trade these off for these gem cutters prisms. So you can level up your quality on gems later from those things. So I've been saving these up and trading them off because you trade them off for those gem cutters prisms. So that was some of the ones that I really struggled with, was the gems and the gear, the flasks and the amulets, rings, jewels, stuff like that. That's stuff that I've been collecting. And the same thing applies to Abyssal. You don't have to collect 100 of these things. You can collect a few of them and save the higher item levels for better bases and get rid of the older crap. So, I mean, this just kind of permeates throughout this entire game. And like I said, that's why I kept a lot of that stuff there, was because of older games had that mindset that you really needed to be sitting on the gear that you find off the ground. In closing, those were the things that I have struggled with throughout the 600 and some hours that I've played this game so far. And those were really things that I had to learn to not do or learn to do differently or something like that. Like I said, this game is a lot about knowledge and experience, and the more you have of both, the better things are going to be as you go. So hopefully you found something helpful in there, and that will do it for this video. We will catch you on the next one. Take care.